One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. The strange thing about losing everything, the billionaire said quietly, staring at the check in front of him, is realizing how many people only love the version of you that could pay. The rain hammered against the diner windows hard enough to make the old neon sign flicker blue and red across the empty booths. It was 2:13 in the morning in South Boston, the kind of cold April night that made even the harbor look exhausted. Clara Whitmore wiped down the counter with one hand while balancing a coffee pot in the other. The diner smelled like burnt bacon, maple syrup, and tired people. Her favorite kind of honesty. The man sitting alone in booth 7 looked completely out of place there. Everything about him screamed Manhattan money. The charcoal wool overcoat draped across the seat beside him probably cost more than her monthly rent. His silver watch reflected the overhead lights every time he moved his wrist, though he barely moved at all. He just sat there staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. Clara had seen heartbreak before. Truck drivers, divorced dads, college kids crying into pancakes at midnight. But rich heartbreak looked different. Quieter, cleaner, more expensive. You planning to marry that coffee, or should I refill it? She asked casually as she approached the table. The man blinked slowly, like he had forgotten where he was. His eyes were bloodshot beneath exhaustion, but sharp, intelligent, dangerous, even tired. I didn't realize it was still there, he admitted. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice people listen to in boardrooms. Clara grabbed the mug. That's because rich people don't actually drink coffee. You just hold it while making terrible decisions. Something almost resembling a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Almost. She poured him a fresh cup anyway. Steam curled between them in the silence. Outside, headlights passed through the rain like ghosts. Long night? She asked. Long life, he replied. Clara leaned lightly against the booth. That sounds expensive. This time he actually smiled. Small. Tired. Real. She noticed his phone lighting up against the table every few seconds. Calls. Messages. News alerts. He ignored all of them. You gonna answer any of those? She asked. No, smart. Clara nodded. Nobody calling after midnight has ever improved someone's life. The man looked at her then. Really looked at her. Not the uniform. Not the name tag. Her. Clara Whitmore. 27 years old. Blonde hair tied into a loose ponytail. Blue sweater under a diner apron because the heater barely worked after midnight. Calm eyes that didn't flinch around money. He seemed confused by that. Most people either recognized him immediately or pretended not to. Clara clearly didn't care either way. You don't know who I am, do you? He asked. Clara glanced at him while topping off sugar dispensers nearby. You're a guy drinking diner coffee at 2 in the morning during a financial panic attack. A beat passed. That's specific. Sweetheart, I work nights. I can smell a nervous breakdown from 20 feet away. He laughed softly before catching himself, almost guilty for doing it. That interested her. People who forgot how to laugh were usually the loneliest. Nathaniel Vaughn, he finally said, offering a hand across the table. Clara Whitmore, she replied, shaking at once. His grip was firm but colder than she expected. Wait. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Nathaniel Vaughn? He gave a small nod. The Nathaniel Vaughn? Unfortunately. Clara whistled under her breath. Wow. Nathaniel sighed, already expecting admiration, judgment, or fake sympathy. Instead, she said, You look way shorter on CNBC. For the first time all night, he laughed out loud. A real laugh this time. Low and surprised. The elderly dishwasher in the kitchen looked up in confusion. Nathaniel rubbed a hand across his jaw, shaking his head slightly. You know, most people don't say things like that to me. That's because most people want something from you. Clara grabbed the coffee pot again. I just want you to stop staring at that check like it personally betrayed you. His eyes dropped toward the receipt sitting untouched beside the plate. 2 eggs. Toast. Coffee. Total, $4.75. Nathaniel stared at it another second before speaking quietly. I think I can't pay for this. Clara stopped moving. The rain seemed louder for a moment. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes clattered softly. That's not possible, she said automatically. You're literally on the cover of Forbes. Was. He corrected gently. Yesterday. Her expression changed then. Not pity. Understanding. Nathaniel noticed immediately. Most people heard billionaire problems and rolled their eyes. Clara looked at him the same way nurses looked at exhausted patients. Like damage was damage, no matter how expensive the suit was. How bad? She asked carefully. Nathaniel leaned back against the booth. The exhaustion in his face suddenly looked years older. Board froze company accounts this afternoon. Investors started pulling out after the leak. My CFO disappeared 12 hours ago. Clara winced softly. Ouch. My lawyer stopped answering calls around dinner. Double ouch. My fiancé left before dessert. Clara placed a hand dramatically over her heart. Okay, that one's just rude. Nathaniel looked down into his coffee again. You know what the funny part is? What? I spent 15 years building companies worth billions of dollars. His voice dropped lower, quieter. And tonight I realized I don't actually know how normal people survive. Clara studied him for a moment beneath the dim yellow diner lights. The billionaire looked exhausted enough to collapse right there against the cracked vinyl booth. Not because he lost money. Because he lost certainty, identity, control. She reached over, took the check from the table, and slid it into her apron pocket. Nathaniel frowned slightly. What are you doing? Clara shrugged. Putting it on my tab. You don't even know me. Exactly. She smiled faintly. Makes you less disappointing than most customers. He stared at her, speechless for the first time that night. Clara grabbed the syrup bottles and started walking away before pausing halfway back to the counter. Oh, and Nathaniel? Yeah. Congratulations. He looked confused. For what? Clara smirked slightly beneath the warm diner lights while thunder rolled outside the windows. You're officially human now. By 4 in the morning, the rain finally slowed into a thin mist drifting across the harbor streets. But Nathaniel Vaughn was still sitting in booth 7 like a man unsure where else to exist. Clara pretended not to notice at first. She restocked ketchup bottles, counted receipts, refilled salt shakers that nobody used. But every few minutes her eyes drifted back toward him. The billionaire had not touched his phone in nearly an hour. That alone felt historic. Most wealthy men treated silence like an allergic reaction. You planning to spend the night here? She finally asked while dropping a fresh basket of fries onto the counter for a police officer near the door. Nathaniel glanced toward the dark windows. Honestly, I do not know where else to go. Clara blinked once. That is either deeply tragic or the beginning of a country song. A faint smile crossed his face again. He seemed surprised every time she made him laugh, like his body had forgotten how. The officer at the counter suddenly looked up from his phone. Holy hell, he muttered. Clara followed his gaze toward the television mounted above the pie display. CNBC flashed across the screen in bright red letters. Vaughn Capital under federal investigation. A photo of Nathaniel filled the screen beside a stock graph falling like a cliff. The diner went quiet for a second. Even the cook stopped scraping the grill. Nathaniel stared at the television without expression. Not angry, not shocked, just tired. Clara grabbed the remote from behind the counter and changed the channel to an old baseball rerun. There, she said calmly. Now Boston is losing instead of you. The cook snorted loudly. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. You did not have to do that. Clara shrugged. People deserve pancakes without public humiliation. That rule applies to billionaires too, especially billionaires. You people are emotionally delicate. He laughed under his breath again, shaking his head slightly. The old bell above the diner door chimed as another gust of cold air swept inside. A delivery driver entered carrying 2 crates of milk. Clara moved quickly to help him while Nathaniel watched her. She moved differently than most people he knew. Efficient, quiet, no wasted motion, no performance. Even exhausted at 4 in the morning, Clara Whitmore carried herself with strange composure, like someone who had learned long ago that panic never paid the bills. You keep staring at me like I owe you money, she called from the kitchen doorway. Nathaniel blinked once, caught. Sorry. You should be. I charge for emotional weirdness after midnight. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. I was just thinking. Dangerous hobby. You do not act impressed. Clara returned carrying fresh coffee filters beneath one arm. Buy what? Buy me. She stopped near the counter. Nathaniel. 3 years ago, I dated a guy who sold homemade cryptocurrency out of a van and called himself the Wolf of Tampa. Nathaniel stared at her. Please tell me that is a joke. He also owned 2 ferrets. That somehow makes it worse. Exactly. She pointed at him with the coffee filters. Compared to that, you are emotionally stable. Another laugh escaped him before he could stop it. It hit him suddenly then, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and humiliation. He could not remember the last conversation he had where nobody wanted something from him. No investor pressure. No negotiation. No hidden agenda wrapped in polite smiles. Clara talked to him like he was just another tired man hiding from life in a diner booth. It felt disturbingly comforting. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. Clara leaned lightly against the counter. "Depends. If it is illegal, I charge extra. Why are you being nice to me?" Her expression softened slightly. "Who said I am being nice?" Nathaniel gave her a look. Clara sighed dramatically. "Fine. Here is my deeply inspirational answer." She folded her arms. "Sometimes people hit bottom. Sometimes they deserve it. Sometimes they do not. Either way, kicking them usually does not help." Nathaniel looked down at the steam rising from his coffee cup. "You really think I hit bottom? Honey, you admitted you cannot pay for eggs." She smiled faintly. "That is rock bottom in America." He shook his head slowly, staring into the diner lights. Reflected across the table. "Yesterday morning, I had a penthouse overlooking Central Park. And now I am sleeping in a diner beside a broken jukebox." Clara glanced toward the dusty machine near the restroom. "To be fair, that jukebox still works if you threaten it correctly." Nathaniel exhaled softly through his nose. Almost another laugh. Then silence settled again between them. Comfortable this time. Outside, dawn slowly began turning the harbor sky gray-blue beyond the windows. Clara checked the clock near the kitchen. 5:15. Her shift technically ended in 45 minutes, though nobody here ever left on time. "You eaten anything besides existential dread tonight?" she asked. Nathaniel looked at the untouched fries she had dropped off earlier. "Not really hungry." Clara narrowed her eyes. That is rich person code for emotionally spiraling. Before he could answer, she disappeared into the kitchen. A minute later, she returned carrying a plate with scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon. Nathaniel frowned slightly. "I did not order that." Clara slid the plate toward him anyway. "Correct. I cannot afford charity." "Good thing this is aggressive hospitality then." She pointed toward the food. "Eat." Nathaniel hesitated before finally picking up the fork. The first bite seemed to surprise him. Clara noticed immediately. "What?" she asked. "It is weirdly good." "Excuse you. These eggs paid for my Honda Civic." He looked up from the plate. "You joke a lot." Clara wiped down the counter slowly. "That is because life is free entertainment if you survive long enough." Nathaniel studied her quietly again. There was something beneath the humor. Something tired. Familiar. Before he could ask, his phone suddenly lit up again against the table. This time Clara accidentally caught the headline on the screen. "Banks prepare to seize Vaughn assets." Nathaniel froze. The room seemed smaller for a second. Colder. Clara saw the exact moment fear finally reached his eyes. Real fear. Not for money. For collapse. For becoming nobody. Nathaniel slowly set the phone face down without answering it. Clara walked over, reached into her apron, and pulled out a black Sharpie. "Marker." Then she grabbed a paper napkin and wrote 3 words across it before sliding it toward him. Nathaniel looked down. "Breathe. Eat. Survive." He stared at the napkin in silence. Clara gave him one small shrug beneath the warm yellow diner lights. One disaster at a time, Billionaire. By 6:30 that morning, Boston looked washed clean by the storm, but Nathaniel Vaughn still felt like a man trapped inside yesterday's collapse. Pale sunlight filtered through the diner windows in thin gray streaks, while commuters hurried past outside, holding paper cups and unfinished lives. The breakfast rush had started. Forks clinked against plates. Coffee machines hissed nonstop. Somebody's toddler was crying near the entrance because his pancake had touched syrup. Normal life. Nathaniel sat quietly in booth 7 watching all of it like a foreign country. Clara moved through the diner with practiced rhythm, balancing plates along one arm while joking with customers twice her age. "Martha, if your husband complains about cholesterol again, remind him he survived the 70s. He will be fine." The older woman laughed loudly while her husband grumbled into his bacon. Nathaniel found himself watching Clara more than the room itself. She made exhaustion look graceful somehow. Every movement efficient. Every smile small but real. Not fake polished like Manhattan networking parties. Real enough to warm the space around her. "You are staring again," Clara said without looking at him as she passed his booth carrying 3 coffees. Nathaniel blinked once. "You notice everything?" Occupational hazard. She slid fresh toast onto another table. Waitresses survive by spotting disasters early. Nathaniel looked down at his phone again. 32 missed calls. 14 emails marked urgent. Hundreds of messages. His company's stock had dropped another 18% overnight. Financial blogs were calling it the fastest billionaire collapse in a decade. One article actually used the phrase corporate bloodbath. He almost laughed at the drama of it. Wealthy people always made failure sound biblical. Clara suddenly dropped a folded newspaper onto his table while passing by. The front page showed his face beneath another headline. Vaughn Empire crumbles as investors panic. Nathaniel stared at it for one long second before folding the paper closed again. Clara appeared beside him with a coffee pot. "Okay," she said calmly. "You officially need a hobby." Nathaniel looked up. "Excuse me. You cannot spend all morning reading articles written by men named Chad in expensive loafers." She topped off his coffee. "That is terrible for your immune system." A tired smile crossed his face. "I used to own 3 homes. And now a waitress is bullying me before sunrise." Clara pointed the coffee pot toward him. "Growth." Before Nathaniel could respond, the diner television switched channels again near the counter. A financial analyst appeared on screen discussing Vaughn Capital with exaggerated seriousness. Sources close to the company suggest Chief Financial Officer Leonard Grayson may have transferred millions before disappearing late Tuesday evening. Nathaniel's jaw tightened instantly. Clara noticed. "Leonard Grayson," she repeated quietly. "That is the guy who vanished." Nathaniel nodded once. "My closest friend for 12 years. Ouch. Best man at my engagement party." Clara winced softly. "That one physically hurt me." Nathaniel leaned back slowly against the booth. The exhaustion in his eyes looked deeper today. "I trusted him with everything. Most betrayals start there." He glanced toward her. Something in her tone changed slightly. "Personal." Clara immediately looked away and grabbed empty dishes from a nearby table before he could ask questions. Nathaniel noticed that too. She deflected emotion the same way she deflected compliments. Smoothly. Professionally. Like someone used to surviving alone. "You ever have somebody ruin your life?" he asked quietly. Clara stopped moving for half a second. "Barely noticeable." "Yep." She continued stacking plates. "Did you recover?" "Depends on the day." Then she smiled lightly again, but Nathaniel caught it this time. The sadness beneath the humor. A businessman near the register suddenly recognized Nathaniel and froze mid-payment. "Holy hell." The man whispered loudly enough for half the diner to hear. "Nathaniel Vaughn?" Several heads turned immediately. Nathaniel stiffened. Cameras appeared faster than dignity in America. One customer quietly lifted his phone. Clara moved before Nathaniel could react. She stepped directly between him and the room, holding a tray against one hip. "Unless one of you plans to pay his therapy bills," she said calmly. "Everybody leaves the man alone while he eats eggs." The room fell awkwardly silent. The businessman lowered his phone first. A woman near the door muttered an apology. Nathaniel stared at Clara, genuinely stunned. She simply turned back toward him afterward like nothing happened. "People are weird around money," she said quietly. "Especially when it disappears." "You did not have to defend me." Clara shrugged. "Actually, I did. Nobody deserves becoming entertainment during breakfast." Nathaniel looked down at his coffee for a moment. "You really are not afraid of me, are you?" Clara laughed softly. "Nathaniel, yesterday I had to stop 2 drunk Bruins fans from fighting over onion rings." She folded her arms lightly. "Compared to that, you are emotionally manageable." Another unexpected laugh escaped him. The sound surprised both of them. Then his phone buzzed again. This time the message came from an unknown number. "You should have seen this coming." Nathaniel's expression darkened instantly. Clara noticed the change. "Bad?" she asked carefully. Nathaniel slid the phone face down against the table. "Just somebody enjoying the funeral." Clara studied him quietly beneath the warm diner lights. "You know what the strange thing about collapse is?" she asked. Nathaniel looked up slowly. "What?" "It shows you who is only standing beside your money." Silence settled between them again. Outside the windows, Boston traffic thickened beneath pale morning sunlight. Nathaniel glanced around the diner one more time. The cracked leather booths. The tired coffee smell. The old waitress who somehow made catastrophe feel survivable. Then his stomach tightened suddenly. "Wait," he muttered quietly. Clara frowned. "What?" Nathaniel slowly reached into his coat pocket. Empty. He checked the other side. Nothing. Then, inside pockets. Faster now. Clara watched his expression shift. Nathaniel. His voice lowered. My wallet is gone. For one strange second, Nathaniel Vaughn looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had forgotten where gravity was. His hands moved through his coat pockets again. Slower this time. Then faster. Empty. The realization settled across his face in stages. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something Clara had never seen on a wealthy person before. Vulnerability. Okay, she said calmly, wiping her hands on a towel. Before you spiraled dramatically into the Atlantic Ocean, when did you last see it? Nathaniel stared at the booth table like it might suddenly answer him. Last night, I think. Excellent. Very specific. Clara crouched beside the booth and checked beneath the table. Nothing except a crumpled sugar packet and somebody's lost receipt from CVS. Nathaniel rubbed both hands across his face. My identification was in there. That sounds annoying. My cards too. Less annoying. He exhaled sharply. My apartment keys. Clara paused. That one actually hurts. The morning rush continued around them while Nathaniel sat frozen in the booth. The billionaire who once managed billion-dollar negotiations without blinking now looked genuinely overwhelmed by a missing leather wallet. Clara understood immediately. It was never about the wallet itself. It was the final insult. The universe taking one more thing after already taking everything else. You think somebody stole it? She asked carefully. Nathaniel shook his head once. I do not know anymore. Clara straightened slowly and studied him beneath the warm diner lights. The expensive coat. The tired eyes. The man trying very hard not to collapse in public. Then she reached into her apron pocket and tossed something black onto the table. Nathaniel blinked. His wallet. He stared at it in complete silence. Clara leaned lightly against the booth. You left it under the coffee napkins around for this morning. Nathaniel grabbed the wallet immediately, opening it with visible relief. Everything still inside. Cards. Cash. Identification. He looked back up at her, stunned. You could have taken anything. Clara raised one eyebrow. Nathaniel, if I wanted rich people money, I would have become a divorce attorney. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Small. Breathless. Real. Then he looked at her again more seriously. Why did you not? Clara frowned slightly. Why did I not what? Take anything. She looked genuinely confused by the question. Because it is not mine. Nathaniel stared at her another moment, almost disturbed by how simple her answer sounded. In his world, everybody took something eventually. Credit. Power. Information. Loyalty. Clara Whitmore handed back a billionaire's wallet like returning a library book. No performance. No expectation. You know, she said while grabbing empty coffee mugs from another table. The fact that you are this shocked says concerning things about your social circle. Nathaniel slipped the wallet carefully back into his coat. You have no idea. The diner door opened again as cold spring air rushed inside. A man in a Navy delivery uniform entered carrying produce boxes for the kitchen. Clara moved to help automatically. Nathaniel watched her laugh at something the driver said before lifting one side of the crate herself. He noticed things now. Her hands slightly red from dishwater. The way she always thanked people by name. How every exhausted customer somehow relaxed around her within minutes. She carried kindness like muscle memory. It unsettled him more than cruelty ever had. You are staring again, Clara called from the kitchen doorway. I am observing. That sounds creepier somehow. Nathaniel shook his head faintly. You really do not care who I used to be, do you? Clara returned to the counter carrying fresh oranges. I barely care who I am before coffee. He smiled despite himself. Then his expression shifted slightly as he looked toward the television near the pie display. Another financial segment played silently beneath scrolling headlines. Analysts dissecting his collapse like sports commentators reviewing a bad season. Nathaniel stared at the screen for a long moment before speaking quietly. You know the worst part? Clara glanced toward him while slicing oranges behind. The counter. The betrayal? No, he looked down at his hands. How quickly everybody disappeared. Silence settled briefly between them. Clara understood that one too well. People love sunlight, she said softly. Not storms. Nathaniel looked toward her again. You talk like somebody who learned that the hard way. Clara kept slicing oranges for another few seconds before answering. Everybody learns eventually. Something in her tone closed the conversation there. Nathaniel noticed. Again. The woman joked her way around pain like an expert boxer avoiding punches. You ever think about doing something besides this? He asked carefully. Clara looked around the diner dramatically. You mean abandoning my glamorous empire of pancakes? I am serious. So am I. These waffles built character. Nathaniel leaned back against the booth, studying her. You are too smart for this place. Clara stopped cutting oranges. Just for a second. Then she resumed. That is an incredibly rude thing to say to a waitress before 7 in the morning. I did not mean it like that. Most rich men never do. Her voice stayed light, but Nathaniel caught the edge beneath it immediately. He sat forward slightly. Okay, fair. Clara shrugged one shoulder. Besides, intelligence is not a job title. The sentence landed harder than she probably intended. Nathaniel went quiet afterward. Because somewhere beneath the exhaustion and panic and collapsing empire, he realized something uncomfortable. Clara Whitmore was smarter than half the executives who used to sit in his boardroom. Maybe more. And unlike them, she had not once tried to impress him. The thought stayed with him while morning sunlight slowly filled the diner windows. Then his phone buzzed again against the table. This time it was not a news alert. It was a bank notification. Final notice. Access to all personal accounts has been temporarily suspended. Nathaniel stared at the message without blinking. Clara watched his face carefully from behind the counter. How bad? She asked softly. He looked up slowly, his voice quieter than before. I think, he admitted, I officially cannot even afford breakfast anymore. Clara stared at him for one long second. Then she grabbed the diner receipt book, scribbled something quickly, and tore out a page before sliding it across the counter toward him. Nathaniel frowned. What is this? Temporary employment application. He blinked once. You are joking. Clara smirked faintly. Can you carry coffee without causing emotional destruction? For the first time in 15 years, Nathaniel Vaughn seriously considered becoming a waiter. He stared at the handwritten application Clara had shoved across the counter like it contained a federal threat. Temporary server position. Must tolerate chaos. Must not cry during breakfast rush. Nathaniel looked up slowly. You cannot be serious. Clara wiped down the coffee station without sympathy. I absolutely am. I built a tech empire. Wonderful. Can you carry 4 plates without injuring a senior citizen? Nathaniel opened his mouth, closed it again. Somewhere behind the grill, the cook laughed loud enough to qualify as harassment. Clara, Nathaniel said carefully, I have never worked in food service. That explains your personality. I am trying to have a serious conversation. And I am trying to stop you from financially dissolving before lunch. She pointed toward the application again. You need cash. The diner needs extra help during the Harbor Festival this weekend. Life is weird. Adapt. Nathaniel stared at the paper another second before shaking his head slowly. This may be the most humiliating moment of my life. Clara leaned against the counter with one eyebrow raised. Nathaniel, yesterday your fiancé left you. Your company imploded on live television, and you almost lost your wallet under a syrup bottle. She folded her arms lightly. Perspective. The billionaire actually laughed under his breath again. It kept happening around her. Like his nervous system forgot misery for 5 seconds at a time. Clara noticed that too. She pretended not to. Fine, Nathaniel muttered finally. Hypothetically speaking. Dangerous phrase. Hypothetically, if I agreed to this public humiliation, what exactly would I be doing? Clara smiled slowly. Oh, this is going to be fun. 40 minutes later. Nathaniel Vaughn stood behind the diner counter wearing a borrowed black apron that looked deeply offended to be touching Italian wool. Clara tied the apron strings behind his back while trying unsuccessfully not to laugh. You look like a Wall Street magician. Nathaniel glanced down at himself. I feel like economic collapse with pockets. Close enough. She handed him a coffee pot. Rule number 1. Keep it upright. I know how coffee works. That confidence concerns me already. The breakfast rush hit hard at 8:30. Construction workers. Nurses ending overnight shifts. Harbor police. Exhausted parents with screaming children and syrup emergencies. Nathaniel stood frozen near the register for the first 3 minutes like a man witnessing civilization for the first time. Table 4 needs refills, Clara called while balancing 3 plates across one arm. What exactly counts as table 4? Clara stopped walking. You are joking. I used to have assistants for directions. Sweetheart, if you survive today, I am nominating you for personal growth. The cook nearly dropped a spatula laughing. Nathaniel grabbed the coffee pot and approached the wrong table entirely. A 70-year-old woman looked up from her pancakes while he awkwardly attempted to refill orange juice instead of coffee. "Honey," she said gently, "I think you are emotionally lost." Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. "That is fair." Across the diner, Clara bit the inside of her cheek, trying not to laugh too loudly. Watching a billionaire fail basic diner tasks was unexpectedly therapeutic. "Less panic," she told him later near the kitchen. "More breathing. People keep asking me for things." "Yes, that is technically your job." Nathaniel looked genuinely exhausted already. "How do you do this every day?" Clara grabbed 2 plates from the counter. "Rent." Then she disappeared back into the crowd before he could answer. By noon, Nathaniel had spilled coffee once, confused ketchup with hot sauce, and accidentally called a retired firefighter sir 6 times in under 2 minutes. But something strange started happening too. People liked him. Not because he was Nathaniel Vaughn. Most customers did not even recognize him beneath the exhaustion and diner apron. They liked him because he listened carefully, because he apologized sincerely, because every mistake embarrassed him in an oddly human way. Around 1 o'clock, Clara found him sitting briefly on an overturned milk crate near the kitchen door, rubbing both hands across his face. "Still alive?" she asked. Nathaniel looked up tiredly. "Barely." She handed him half a grilled cheese sandwich wrapped in paper. "Employee lunch. You people eat standing up?" Luxury left this building around 1987. Nathaniel accepted the sandwich quietly. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait." Clara froze for half a second. "What?" "This bread is sourdough." "Correct." "Fresh rosemary butter." "Possibly." Nathaniel looked at her carefully now. "That tomato soup has smoked paprika." Clara sighed dramatically toward the ceiling. "I knew dating chefs would eventually become useful." Nathaniel stared another moment. "Nobody working in a harbor diner casually uses smoked paprika. And nobody worth $11 billion should be carrying ketchup bottles," she replied smoothly. "Yet here we are." He smiled faintly despite himself. Then his phone buzzed again in his pocket. Nathaniel checked the screen. Another legal notice. Another financial freeze. Another piece of his old life disappearing. Clara watched the color drain slightly from his face. "Bad?" she asked softly. Nathaniel locked the phone immediately. "I just lost the penthouse." Silence settled briefly between them. Clara sat down beside him on the milk crates near the kitchen, close enough that he could smell coffee and vanilla on her sweater. "You know something weird?" she said quietly. Nathaniel looked toward her. "What?" Clara shrugged lightly. "You seem less miserable today." He almost answered immediately, then stopped, because she was right. Somehow between burnt coffee, screaming toddlers, and public humiliation beside the pie display, he had laughed more in one day than he had in months. Nathaniel looked down at the untouched legal notice on his phone again before speaking softly. "Maybe losing everything just removed all the things that were making me miserable." Clara studied him for a moment beneath the warm kitchen lights. Then she smiled faintly. "Careful, billionaire." "Why?" That almost sounded wise. 3 days later, Nathaniel Vaughn could carry 4 coffee mugs without triggering a small economic disaster. Clara considered that genuine character development. The Harbor Festival had turned the diner into complete chaos from sunrise until midnight. Tourists flooded the waterfront streets carrying lobster rolls and overpriced souvenirs, while local musicians played badly beside the pier for tips and emotional validation. Inside Murphy's diner, the air smelled like fried onions, coffee, and exhaustion. Nathaniel stood near the register balancing 2 plates carefully while Clara shouted over the noise from across the room. "Table 6 needs ketchup." "I already gave them ketchup." "That was table 4. "Why are there so many tables?" Clara laughed while sliding pancakes toward another customer. "You are adapting beautifully." Nathaniel rolled his eyes, but smiled anyway. It kept surprising him how often that happened now. Somewhere between burnt coffee and 12-hour shifts, the constant pressure crushing his chest had started loosening slightly. He still woke up every morning to legal notices and financial headlines. Still checked his phone with dread. Still watched pieces of his old life disappear one account at a time. But inside the diner, none of that seemed to matter quite as much. In Murphy's, people only cared whether the coffee was hot and the bacon crispy. There was something strangely healing about that. "Nathaniel," Clara called again. "Try not to flirt with the customers. We need tips, not lawsuits." An older woman near the counter burst into laughter while Nathaniel stared at Clara in disbelief. I smiled one time. Exactly. Dangerous. Before he could answer, the bell above the diner entrance chimed sharply. The entire mood of the room shifted instantly. Nathaniel recognized the man walking inside before the rainwater even stopped dripping from his coat. Derek Holloway, senior partner at Holloway Ventures. One of the first investors who publicly abandoned Vaughn Capital after the collapse. Derek moved through the diner with the polished confidence of somebody who had never once doubted his own importance. Expensive watch, tailored navy coat, perfect hair despite the weather outside. He spotted Nathaniel immediately and smirked. Well, Derek said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. This is depressing. Silence spread slowly across the diner. Nathaniel's shoulders tightened automatically. Clara noticed. Derek glanced around the room theatrically before looking back at Nathaniel standing there in a diner apron. You know, he continued with fake sympathy. When the papers said you hit bottom, I honestly assumed there would still be a yacht involved. A couple customers looked uncomfortable. Others pretended not to listen while absolutely listening. Nathaniel set the plates down carefully on the counter. Old instincts told him to respond sharply. Defend himself. Dominate the room. But exhaustion had worn most of the fight out of him lately. Good afternoon, Derek, he said quietly instead. Derek laughed once under his breath. Still pretending dignity matters, huh? Clara looked up slowly from the coffee station. Her expression stayed calm. Too calm. Nathaniel recognized that look already. It usually meant somebody was about to regret existing near her. Derek continued. I have to admit, though, this is educational. He glanced toward the apron again, seeing how quickly power disappears once the money goes away. The diner stayed silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Nathaniel looked down briefly, jaw tight. Then Clara walked forward carrying a fresh receipt pad in one hand. She stopped beside Nathaniel without hesitation. Hi, she said pleasantly to Derek. Are you ordering food or just performing emotionally for strangers? A few people near the counter choked, trying not to laugh. Derek blinked once. Excuse me. Clara smiled politely. We charge extra for public humiliation during lunch rush. Derek straightened slightly. Do you know who I am? Not emotionally, Clara replied calmly. No, a construction worker near booth 3 actually snorted coffee through his nose. Nathaniel stared straight ahead, trying unsuccessfully not to smile. Derek looked irritated now. I was speaking to him. Clara nodded once. I know. Her voice stayed soft, controlled, and he was kind enough not to embarrass you in return. Silence. Derek's expression hardened. You really think he deserves defending? Clara glanced briefly toward Nathaniel before answering. I think people show their character most clearly when somebody is already losing. Derek scoffed. He is finished. Clara tilted her head slightly. Then why are you still so afraid of him? The room went completely still. Even the kitchen noises seemed quieter somehow. Derek opened his mouth once, closed it again. Nathaniel looked toward Clara slowly, stunned by the precision of the sentence. She had not raised her voice, had not insulted the man directly, but somehow she had stripped all the power out of the conversation in 5 calm seconds. Derek glanced around the diner, realizing people were no longer looking at Nathaniel with pity. They were looking at him with discomfort. Clara handed him a menu casually. Now, she said gently, would you like coffee or just more insecurity? This time half the diner laughed openly. Derek grabbed the menu stiffly, muttered something under his breath, and walked toward a back booth alone. Clara immediately turned back toward the counter like nothing happened. Table 4 still needs ketchup, she announced. Nathaniel stood frozen for another second before following her toward the coffee station. You did not have to do that, he said quietly. Clara grabbed clean mugs from the shelf. Correct. Then why? She shrugged lightly without looking at him. Because nobody should get kicked while they are already bleeding pride. Nathaniel stared at her beneath the warm yellow diner lights. Something shifted inside him then. Quiet. Unexpected. Dangerous in a completely different way than business ever was. Because for the first time in months, somebody had stood beside him when there was absolutely nothing to gain from it. And somehow that mattered more than every investor who had abandoned him combined. Clara glanced sideways toward him while pouring coffee. What? Nathaniel shook his head. Slowly. Nothing. But it was not nothing. Not even close. The strange thing about exhaustion was how honest it made people. By the following Thursday night, The Harbor Festival crowds had finally thinned, leaving Murphy's diner quieter than usual. Rain drifted softly across the windows again, turning the neon sign outside into blurred streaks of red and blue. Nathaniel sat alone at the counter after closing time, wearing the same black apron he once considered humiliating. Now it just felt familiar. Clara stood on a chair near the pie display, trying to change a flickering light bulb while muttering insults at electrical engineering. "This diner has the structural integrity of a haunted toaster," she complained. Nathaniel watched her balance dangerously on the chair. "You are going to fall. Your optimism is inspiring." "I am serious." Clara reached higher. The chair wobbled immediately. Nathaniel stood up on instinct just as she slipped slightly, catching her arm before she lost balance completely. For one brief second, everything went still. Clara looked down at him from the chair, Nathaniel's hand still lightly around her wrist. The diner suddenly felt smaller somehow, warmer. Rain tapped softly against the windows while neither of them moved. Then Clara cleared her throat first. "Okay," she said quietly. "Maybe the billionaire gets one heroic moment." Nathaniel released her arm slowly, though his hand lingered half a second longer than necessary. "You are welcome. Do not let it inflate your ego. You still confused ranch dressing with tartar sauce yesterday." Nathaniel smiled despite himself and stepped back. Clara climbed down from the chair, more carefully this time. Neither mentioned the strange silence that had just passed between them. Neither ignored it either. Murphy suddenly emerged from the kitchen carrying inventory sheets and squinting through his glasses. "Whitmore," he grumbled. Supplier bill bounced again. Clara's shoulders tightened almost invisibly. Nathaniel noticed immediately. "How much?" Clara asked carefully. $860. Murphy sighed tiredly. "I can stall them until Monday." "I will figure it out," Clara replied. Quickly. Too quickly. Murphy disappeared back into the office muttering about lettuce prices and economic collapse. Nathaniel looked toward Clara afterward. "You okay?" "Fantastic." She started wiping already clean counters. Nothing says emotional stability like financial panic after midnight. Nathaniel leaned lightly against the counter. "You should let me help." Clara stopped moving instantly. "No." The answer came sharp enough to surprise both of them. She exhaled softly afterward. "Sorry." Reflex. Nathaniel studied her carefully. "Clara." "Nathaniel. You helped me when I had nothing. That was different." "Why?" Clara looked down at the rag in her hands for several quiet seconds before answering. "Because people with money always think helping means owning part of the person afterward." The sentence settled heavily between them. Nathaniel understood then that somebody had hurt her long before he walked into Murphy's diner, carrying financial ruin and expensive shoes. "I would never do that," he said quietly. Clara smiled faintly without looking up. "Most people say that before they do." Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Somewhere outside, a train horn echoed faintly across the harbor. Nathaniel watched her another moment before speaking again. "What happened to you?" Clara laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "That is a dangerously personal question for a man wearing diner aprons professionally." Still, she stayed quiet for so long he thought she might ignore him completely. Then she finally leaned against the counter across from him beneath the warm yellow lights. "My father got sick 3 years ago," she said softly. "Heart condition. No insurance worth mentioning." Nathaniel listened silently. "I was finishing my economics degree. Internship lined up in New York. Everything looked—" She searched for the word briefly. "Predictable." Her eyes drifted toward the rain outside. Then medical debt happened. Funeral expenses happened. Life happened harder. Nathaniel felt something tighten painfully in his chest. Clara shrugged lightly afterward, like discussing weather instead of grief. "So now I serve pancakes to emotionally unstable businessmen and rescue billionaires from public breakdowns." "That too." Nathaniel smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. "You gave up your future for your family." Clara looked toward him then. "No," her voice stayed calm. "Certain. I chose my family over a different future." Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Nathaniel realized something suddenly then. Clara never talked like a victim. Not once. Even while carrying more weight than most people twice her age. "You know," he said quietly, "half the analysts at Vaughn Capital could not explain market behavior the way you do." Clara rolled her eyes lightly. "Please do not compliment me with finance. That is the least romantic language on earth." Nathaniel blinked once. "Romantic?" The word hung strangely between them. Clara seemed to realize it too because she immediately grabbed a stack of menus to avoid eye contact. Nathaniel tried not to smile. Failed slightly. Then his phone buzzed against the counter again. He glanced down automatically. Another legal email. Another demand. Another piece of the empire collapsing. But this time something felt different. Smaller somehow. Clara noticed his expression. Bad news? She asked softly. Nathaniel stared at the screen another second before locking the phone and sliding it away completely. Then he looked at her beneath the warm diner lights and shrugged lightly. Honestly, Clara raised one eyebrow. Honestly, he smiled faintly. Tired. Real. I stopped caring 5 minutes ago. Clara stared at him in surprise before a quiet laugh escaped her. The kind that reached her eyes this time. Outside, rain continued falling across the harbor while two exhausted people stood alone inside a nearly empty diner pretending the moment between them was still simple. It was not simple anymore. Not even close. At 2:17 in the morning, Clara Whitmore accidentally discovered the first crack in the entire disaster. Murphy's diner had finally gone quiet after another endless shift. Chairs sat upside down on tables. The grill hissed softly while cooling down for the night. Outside, fog rolled across the harbor streets beneath pale streetlights, turning Boston into a watercolor painting nobody could afford. Nathaniel sat at the counter beside a stack of legal papers looking exhausted enough to fall asleep mid-breath. Clara stood nearby balancing the diner books, muttering at numbers under her breath. These tomato suppliers are committing organized crime, she whispered. Nathaniel glanced sideways. You talk to spreadsheets like they insulted your family. Numbers are emotional terrorists. She flipped another invoice page. Then suddenly she froze. Nathaniel noticed immediately. What? Clara stared down at the receipt in front of her. Wait. That usually means something terrible. No. Worse. She grabbed a pen quickly and started scribbling numbers across a napkin with alarming speed. Nathaniel blinked once. Clara. She ignored him completely now. Her eyes moved rapidly between columns. Percentages. Dates. Transfer totals. Then she reached across the counter and grabbed one of Nathaniel's legal files without asking permission. Your former CFO, she said quickly. Leonard Grayson. Nathaniel straightened immediately. What about him? Clara flipped through transaction records with sharp precision. The transfers. What transfers? The offshore ones. Nathaniel frowned deeply. Those accounts were authorized through legal subsidiaries. No, Clara pointed toward the page hard enough to wrinkle it. They were disguised as legal subsidiaries. Silence. Nathaniel stared at her. Clara's entire energy had changed now. The humor gone. The waitress disappeared for a second. What remained looked frighteningly intelligent. Look here, she said quickly. These routing numbers repeat through shell corporations tied to the same Cayman clearing group. Nathaniel blinked slowly. How did you see that? Clara kept scanning the documents. Because whoever built this laundering structure was arrogant. Most financial fraud is. Exactly. She circled another line sharply. They reused timing patterns. Transfers every 48 hours to avoid threshold alerts. Nathaniel stared at her in complete silence now. Clara. She finally looked up. What? You just identified a 7-layer fraud. Structure in under 3 minutes. Clara immediately looked away again. Well, she shrugged lightly. Math keeps me humble. Nathaniel laughed once under his breath despite the tension. Then he stood up quickly, moving beside her at the counter. Their shoulders nearly touched beneath the warm diner lights while papers spread across the surface between coffee stains and pie menus. Show me again, he said quietly. Clara pointed across the documents. Leonard moved money slowly enough to avoid panic, but fast enough to collapse investor confidence once the leak became public. Nathaniel's expression darkened immediately. He manufactured the panic. And probably shorted your own stock before the collapse. Silence filled the diner. Nathaniel felt something shift violently into place inside his mind. Suddenly the timeline made sense. The leaks. The investor exits. The frozen accounts. The pressure campaign. Leonard had not betrayed him impulsively. He planned this for months. Clara looked toward him carefully. Nathaniel. Yeah. I do not think your company failed. He met her eyes beneath the soft yellow lights. I think somebody gutted it while you trusted them. The sentence hit harder than anger. Nathaniel leaned both hands against the counter slowly. For weeks he blamed himself. Thought maybe the empire collapsed because he missed something. Because he became arrogant, distracted, weak. But now the puzzle finally looked different. I need proof, he said quietly. Clara nodded once. Then we find proof. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. Why are you helping me? Clara stared down at the paperwork another second before answering softly. Because somebody should. The simplicity of the answer almost hurt. Outside, fog pressed softly against the diner windows while midnight traffic faded near the harbor. Nathaniel realized suddenly how close they were standing. Clara smelled faintly like coffee and vanilla again. Familiar now. Dangerous now. She glanced sideways toward him. What? Nathaniel shook his head lightly. You missed your calling. Clara snorted softly. Please. My calling forgot to pay rent. He smiled faintly before looking back down at the papers. No, he said quietly. I mean it. His voice lowered slightly. Honest. You are extraordinary. Clara stopped moving completely. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Nathaniel realized too late that he had not said it casually. He meant every word. Clara looked down quickly, pretending to reorganize invoices that were already organized. Careful, billionaire, she murmured softly. Compliments after midnight are legally suspicious. Nathaniel smiled despite himself. Then his phone suddenly rang across the counter. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Hello. The voice on the other side spoke fast. Panicked. Nathaniel's former legal advisor. Nathaniel, the man whispered urgently. Listen carefully. The federal audit team just reopened the investigation. Nathaniel frowned. Why? Because anonymous documents were submitted tonight. His eyes immediately shifted toward Clara beside him. What documents? Evidence of internal fraud. Silence. Nathaniel slowly looked down at the papers spread across Murphy's counter beneath coffee rings and diner receipts. Clara Whitmore had just done in 20 minutes what entire investigative teams failed to uncover for weeks. Nathaniel, the lawyer pressed. Are you still there? Nathaniel kept staring at Clara, the waitress who joked about pancakes, the woman who carried grief quietly, the person who somehow saw through financial deception faster than Wall Street executives earning millions. Clara looked back at him uncertainly. What? She whispered. Nathaniel exhaled softly, almost laughing from disbelief. I think, he said quietly into the phone, I just found the smartest person in Boston working night shifts at a diner. 6 months later, Murphy's diner still smelled like burnt coffee, buttered toast, and people trying their best. Some things never changed. Outside, early autumn sunlight spilled across the Boston harbor while tourists wandered the waterfront carrying cameras and overpriced lobster rolls. Inside the diner, Clara Whitmore stood behind the counter balancing receipts between one hand and a cinnamon roll in the other while arguing with the ancient register machine like it had personally betrayed her family. If you freeze again, she warned the machine softly, I am replacing you with a calculator and emotional violence. Murphy laughed from the kitchen. You've been talking to appliances since the billionaire left. Clara rolled her eyes immediately. He did not leave. Murphy smirked knowingly. Uh-huh. Before she could respond, the bell above the diner entrance chimed softly. Clara looked up automatically, then froze. Nathaniel Vaughn stood near the doorway wearing a charcoal coat, and that same tired but gentle smile she somehow still was not prepared for. Except he did not look broken anymore. The exhaustion was gone from his face now. The panic too. His posture had changed. Calm instead of collapsing. Strong instead of surviving. Clara hated how much relief hit her chest at the sight of him. You are late, she said casually, even though her voice softened slightly. Nathaniel glanced at his watch. By 7 minutes. Unacceptable. We almost replaced you emotionally. He smiled and walked toward the counter carrying something behind his back. Clara narrowed her eyes immediately. What did you do? That sounds accusatory. Because your face usually means expensive decisions. Nathaniel laughed quietly under his breath before revealing a bouquet of white tulips. Clara blinked once in surprise. Okay, she admitted softly. That is annoyingly sweet. I practice. He handed her the flowers carefully. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange. Familiar now. Dangerous now. Murphy suddenly cleared his throat dramatically from the kitchen doorway. I suddenly need to inventory onions for 20 minutes. Then he disappeared immediately before Clara could throw something at him. Nathaniel leaned lightly against the counter watching her, try not to smile too much at the flowers. You still come here every morning. Clara observed quietly. You still make terrible coffee, he replied. And yet you remain emotionally attached. Nathaniel smiled again. God? She missed that smile more than she intended to admit during the weeks he spent rebuilding his company in New York. Everything changed after the fraud investigation reopened. Leonard Grayson eventually disappeared into federal courtrooms and financial headlines, while Vaughn Capital slowly recovered. Investors returned. Accounts unfroze. The empire survived. Newspapers called it one of the greatest corporate recoveries in years. Nathaniel called it exhausting. Because somewhere during the legal chaos and board meetings and television interviews, he realized something terrifyingly simple. The happiest moments of his entire year happened inside a harbor diner beside a woman who argued with ketchup bottles. You look thoughtful, Clara said while placing the tulips carefully into a water pitcher behind the counter. Dangerous. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket slowly. Actually, I came here for a reason. Clara immediately pointed a warning finger at him. If this is another job offer, I am legally allowed to throw pancakes. Nathaniel laughed softly. Not exactly. He placed a small silver key on the counter between them. Clara frowned slightly. What is that? An apartment key. Silence. Nathaniel. Before you panic dramatically, he said quickly, listen first. Clara folded her arms, but stayed quiet. Nathaniel looked down at the counter briefly before speaking again. There is a bookstore cafe opening near the harbor next month. Clara blinked once. Okay. And apparently the owner is terrible at choosing furniture. Still unclear where this is going. Nathaniel smiled faintly. I bought the building. Clara stared at him. You bought a bookstore? Technically, I bought the entire property. That sentence physically upset me. Nathaniel laughed softly before his expression turned more serious. Honest. I want you to run it with me. Clara went completely still. Outside the diner windows, sunlight flickered softly across the harbor water. Nathaniel, she said quietly, I am a waitress. He shook his head immediately. No, his voice stayed calm but certain. You are the smartest person I have ever met. Clara looked away first. You only say that because I saved your billionaire ego. No, Nathaniel stepped closer to the counter now. I say it because when my entire life collapsed, you were the only person who saw me as human. Before you saw me as useful. Silence settled softly between them. Clara's eyes lowered toward the silver key still resting on the counter. That cafe, Nathaniel continued quietly. It is not charity. It is not rescue. He smiled faintly. Honestly, I think it is probably me trying to invent excuses to keep seeing you every day. Clara laughed softly under her breath, despite herself. Then Nathaniel said the thing that finally made her stop breathing for half a second. I survived because of you, Clara. His voice lowered slightly. Warmer. But somewhere along the way, surviving stopped being the important part. Clara slowly looked back up at him beneath the warm diner lights. Nathaniel held her gaze steadily now. No boardroom mask. No billionaire armor. Just honesty. I think, he admitted softly. I fell in love with you somewhere between the coffee disasters and the emotional terrorism of your diner pancakes. Clara stared at him in complete silence for one long moment. Then she laughed through tears she had not realized were forming. That, she whispered softly, might actually be the worst love confession in American history. Nathaniel smiled carefully. Is that a no? Clara reached across the counter slowly and took his hand for the first time. Warm. Steady. Real. No, she said quietly. That is definitely not a no. Outside, Boston Harbor glowed gold beneath the autumn sunlight while inside Murphy's Diner, a billionaire and a waitress stood smiling at each other beside cold coffee and fresh tulips. And somehow, after everything life had taken from both of them, the quiet little moment felt richer than any empire either had ever known. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more emotional cinematic stories about love, dignity, and second chances. Your support helps us bring powerful characters and unforgettable moments to life. Stay until the next story, because sometimes the quietest people change everything.